This is another iRaw podcast. We podcast to make the world a better place for animals.
This is the Talking Animal Law podcast, brought to you by the UK Centre for Animal Law and hosted by Paula Sparks, Director of A-Law. But it's not just for lawyers, it's for anyone who cares about animals. So no matter who you are, if you want to know more about animal protection, news, ethics and animal law reform, then this is the podcast for you.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Talking Animal Law podcast. And we have a stellar lineup for this extended issue on law and veganism, as I am joined by co-host Tamara Bedic, President of the National Lawyers Guild for New York City and Chair of the National Lawyers Guild New York City's Animal Rights Committee, a long-time animal rescuer, volunteer legal observer, and the author of numerous articles on animal issues. And we are talking animal law with guests Dr. Jeanette Rowley from the UK, Dr. Carlo Prisco, who will give us a perspective on Italian law and veganism, and Ralf Muller-Amenitsch, who will be talking about law and veganism in Germany. So a little more about our guests. Dr. Jeanette Rowley founded the Campaign for Vegan Rights in 2012 with the formation of the International Vegan Rights Alliance. She manages the Vegan Society's Know Your Rights service and has recently introduced the Society's Rights in Education function. She typically oversees over 300 requests for support every year, and through her work with vegan complainants has helped bring about many policy changes which protect vegans and advance veganism. Dr. Carlo Prisco is a lawyer and has a PhD in the philosophy of law. He was an assistant professor at the State University of Milan in philosophy of law and bioethics. And while in Italy, he represented vegan mothers whose children. Ralf Muller-Amenitsch is a German lawyer specialising in labour, social and family law. He's the author of the first German book on vegan law, Vegansism, with the Austrian version following in 2020. Since 2018, Mr. Amish has lectured on vegan customer law and animal rights at the University of Applied Science in Cologne and Bamberg and Berlin. A global pioneer in vegan law, Ralf founded and co-organised in the first and second International Symposium on Vegan Law in Berlin, and he edits a blog and podcast on vegan law for PETA Germany. So we're really pleased to welcome our guests and Tamara as our co-host to talk to us today about the issues around veganism and law. So thank you everyone again for joining us, and hello and welcome to you. Drs. Jeanette Rowley and Dr. Carlo Prisco, I'm going to turn to you first, but I think if I may, if Tamara and I may, we will just refer to you as Jeanette and Carlo and keep this more informal. But thank you very much for coming on today. So my first question is really for both of you, because I'd like a perspective from both of you on this issue of what we're talking about when we're talking about veganism in this context, because on one view, our listeners may feel that we are talking about not eating animal-derived products. But in fact, I think both of you are using a more expansive definition of the word veganism. So I'd just like to ask you both, perhaps if I start with you, Jeanette, about how you define veganism.
So I work with the definition of the Vegan Society, which is veganism as a philosophy and way of living, which seeks to exclude as far as possible and practical all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals. So people who identify as ethical vegan would exclude all animal products in their diet, and they would also aim to seek out alternatives to wool, leather, and do whatever they can really once they've developed the ethical commitment.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And Carlo, do you adopt broadly the same definition?
Well, my answer could be considered a little weird because I'd say that veganism could be intended in many different ways. And it is for this reason that I have invented something different, which is my philosophy, my moral moral philosophy that aims at changing and shifting the paradigm. So when it comes to just veganism, I totally agree with Jeanette, but I also think that we need to find a different word, because veganism just defines or usually just defines any kind of diet, not including animal derivatives.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. And I also really liked, I think it was in Ralph's chapter, his description of veganism as a form of non-specious pacifism. And I think that's, to me, spoke very much to what the philosophy is about. So, we may ask him about that a bit later. But Tamara, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, I wanted to find out when you two co-edited your book, Law and Veganism, An International Perspective, how did you decide what countries to include and what countries to exclude? What was the necessary requirement?
There were no exclusions, really. There were only invitations, general invitations for people to contribute. I think the only requirement was that people were supportive of the idea of using law to protect veganism to protect vegans and advance veganism. And we also wanted critical perspectives on the use of law, because using law doesn't necessarily mean that everything's going to be okay. So we were very interested, for example, in Sorin's experience in Canada.
Carlo, have you anything to add to that?
No, I actually have just to say that I need to pay a tribute to Jeanette, because she was the one who had the idea about that book, and she kindly invited me to co-editing that book. So yeah, I totally agree with her.
So 47 countries signed the European Convention on Human Rights, whose Article 9 protects freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. And those signatories include your country, Carlo, Italy, and Portugal, and Serbia, a recent signatory in 2020, and Poland, with a vibrant vegan community. But none of those countries established ethical veganism as a legally recognized creed. What's preventing them? And what should vegans in those countries, Serbia, Poland, Italy, what should they be doing to solidify protection for themselves and for the secular creed they followed, called veganism?
Yeah, I think that here we have two main issues. One is politics and the other is economics. And even if our same constitution and, of course, many laws do protect veganism, not just as a creed, but also as a creed, it's still complicated for us to be recognized as what we are. For me, it's complicated because I've seen many cases from the legal perspective, and it was complicated because even if we had laws and the Constitution, of course, still the judges are people. People have feelings, and in our country, being vegan is still something very condemned because it's considered harmful, especially for the babies. So when you have kids and you want to make them vegan, it's very hard because in many cases you have the law, but you also have people who just don't care about the law. So even if they are judges and they should apply the law, they can find many reasons not to do so, not to comply with the law. So yeah, I think that from one perspective, we don't need more laws because we already have such laws. And on the other hand, we should just once again change our paradigm and shift such paradigm, because as long as we have people involved with the law and they have to apply the law, they should, of course, change their mind before they can start applying and complying with the law.
Thank you. And Jeanette, can I ask you, Tamara referred to the European Convention on Human Rights and Article 9 specifically protecting freedom of thought, conscience and religion. But has the European Court itself accepted that Article 9, within that scope, veganism can be a protected characteristic?
I would argue that it has. The Commission had the power to deal with cases under the Convention in the early days, and it was the Commission that decided, that found veganism was in the scope of the legal meaning of Article 9. But since then, the European Court's published guidance includes veganism as convictions that are protected under Article 9. So I would say absolutely, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting. And also in the UK, there's the equality legislation in the form of the Equality Act of 2010. What's the legal test for protection of a belief under that act?
The legal test for under the current equality law is derived from the European Court of Human Rights.
Okay.
So it's the authoritative guidance and the jurisprudence that's given rise to our legal test. So first of all, the belief must be genuinely held. That must be proven. It must be a belief and not an opinion. It must involve a weighty and substantial aspect of human life and behaviour. The belief must be cogent and serious. It must be cohesive and it must be important. And the belief must also be worthy of respect in a democratic society. And it shouldn't be incompatible with human dignity and nor conflict with the fundamental rights of other people. And I think I would just add that veganism easily meets that criteria.
Yeah, that's helpful. And can you tell us a bit about the Hashman case? I think this was the first case where the employment tribunal provided protection under the equality legislation against discrimination on the basis of a belief in veganism.
It wasn't based on a belief in veganism. It was based on a belief in the sanctity of life.
Right.
But that belief was related to the wider vegan principles of the complainant.
Okay.
And that case wasn't brought under the current Equality Act. It was brought under the 2003 regulations that were implemented as a result of the Equality Directive of the European Union in 2000. And that directive included protection for people who had qualifying religions and beliefs. So that case was decided under the 2003 regulations. The 2003 regulations were included in the Equality Act 2006, and they remain in the Equality Act 2010. And the Hashman case was a case about a gardener who worked for people who were either the huntspeople themselves or related to the hunt in some way. And he complained that his employment contract was terminated because he had animal rights beliefs, specifically related to hunting and hare coursing.
Okay, that's interesting. And I think there was another case in 2020, the Casimajana case, that confirmed ethical veganism meets the legal test for a philosophical non-religious belief under the Equalities Act.
That's right. That case was brought under the 2010 provisions. And the judge in that case highlighted that it would be ludicrous to have protection under the European Convention and not have protection under the Equality Act. And I would just say that the provision for the protection of religion and belief under our equality law actually links directly to Article 9 of the Convention. We're supposed to look to Article 9 in the protection of those beliefs.
And recently, earlier this year, there was a case of Owen and Willow Tower, and the court concluded, despite the claimant's evidence, that she hadn't exercised a genuine belief in ethical veganism. So on one view, this case really turns on its facts. The evidential threshold wasn't met. But you make the point in an article that you wrote about the case that you felt the court had applied quite a high threshold for establishing that genuine belief. Can you explain that a little further?
Yes, the ethical vegan beliefs of the applicant were compared to those in the prior case, which I don't believe is the right thing to do. Also, the tribunal in that case said that the applicant hadn't expressed themselves very well, and I don't think we should expect too much of applicants in terms of expression when they're in those situations. It's well established, really, that the threshold requirements for a belief shouldn't be set so high that it bars people from the protections that they should be entitled to under the convention. So on those grounds, I think the decision, it wasn't the right decision in my view. I think when the genuineness of a claimant's beliefs is in doubt, then I think the inquiry should be a lot less than it was. And in any case, I think the common ground to vegan people is the diet, and the applicant in that case followed a vegan diet and went further than that. The applicant wore gloves at work when they were required to handle non-vegan products, and they also bought toiletries and cosmetics that were, in their words, cruelty-free. So I think there was evidence that person is on an ethical vegan path.
Okay, interesting. Tamara, did you want to come in?
Yeah, when we talk about Casamitiana, Hashman, Tracy Owen now, we see that vegans are gaining more of a spotlight, but they're also becoming targets of dislike from a minority of very vocal vegan phobes. And both of you mention in your book that vegans are jeered at, harassed, some are labeled terrorists. Some vegans are so afraid of social censure that they're reluctant to be identified. And I'm wondering, why do you think there's such a growing resentment against vegans? Do you want to start, Jeanette?
I think it's a complex question, and it's to use the evidence that we have would really point to perhaps the way the press have used the term vegan. I am aware that the press have used the term vegan when they've been describing the potential criminal activity of some animal rights activists. So they'll refer to a group of vegans in a negative way. So, that kind of thing can sway public opinion. And also, I'm aware that the press have referred to the vegan diet as being responsible in some way for harm and death, when in fact, the medical reason is something else. I think that can contribute to, bad reputation for veganism. Quite often we see reports about veganism being a restrictive diet, which isn't true. There's nothing restricted at all. In fact, all the dietetic associations around the world support a healthy vegan diet. So I think there are many different reasons that may come into play when veganism is targeted. And I think in the UK, perhaps the most important one is that anti-terrorist educators have said that vegans are a group to watch out for, which is quite alarming. And we know that the vegan flag is on the radar of anti-terrorist police. So these kind of things can cause negative opinion about veganism, I think.
Yeah, here in the US we have a similar trend. What about in Italy, Carlo?
I can see at least two different way of thinking about this. The first is some just have interests against veganism. When I was invited to talk on the television, they just bullied me because they were interested in animal products because of money. So they have a lot of commercials involving animal products. So they just don't want me to promote veganism, me or anybody else. including vegan doctors. So yeah, that's for sure one reason, and they are definitely in bad faith. I can also see or imagine that some people are in good faith, but they are just afraid of us, because on one hand, we are a threat to their behavior, and on the other hand, they might be afraid because they know that they are wrong. They are doing the wrong thing when they eat animals, and they just don't want to face this basic truth.
Yeah, so that's a sort of moral challenge that people resist. Yeah, it's a good point. Now, you both contributed individual chapters to the text that you co-edited, Law and Veganism. Jeanette, you wrote about veganism in the UK, and Carlo, you analyzed the situation in Italy. But both of your chapters, interestingly, focused on children and the challenges to veganism posed in the school environment. Carlo, although your chapter mostly focused on children's diet, are there other circumstances in Italian schools about which vegan parents have complained to you, whether in preschool or in later education like university?
Yeah, well, actually, it's about discrimination because if not related with just food, it's the way they are treated by teachers or other students. And that's the main issue. And it's still connected with everything we said before about discriminating vegan people and hating veganism for the many reasons we have mentioned. So yeah, that's the big deal, because the parents, of course, who are not vegan, consider vegan kids as a threat to their way of educating their kids. So there's a conflict, and such conflict just doesn't stay home. But of course, the other kids talking with their parents, then they talk with the other students, and they just maybe bully the vegan kids because they are taught doing so from the teachers or from their parents. So yeah, once again, it's everything about culture. I think that veganism should be recognized at a social level before avoiding such issues at any level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's switch to something sort of central in primary school and nursery school, and that's milk. Jeanette, in 2019, the Vegan Society complained that having the state subsidize dairy milk on the one hand, while not even offering plant-based milk alternatives to vegan children, that's discriminatory. And the UK government responded by saying that it's awaiting the report from the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition, who are evaluating plant-based alternatives. Can you update us about that? Is the report coming?
The report will be out in 2024, as far as I'm aware. I think it was due this year, but I do appreciate these things can take some time. So in 2019, the complaint was specifically about government-run health schemes that provide for cow's milk and not plant-based alternatives. And we released a legal opinion within the network to say that the legislation could be changed so that plant-based milks could be included. And this generated an equality assessment from the Department of Health and Social Care. And then after the equality assessment, the Food Standards Agency said that they wanted to set up a working group to look into the suitability of plant-based alternatives for young children on those schemes. In the end, they decided to look at the suitability of plant-based alternatives for the general population. I don't know what the outcome of that will be, but we can't move forward with the request for a change in legislation until we get the report in 2024. And that's as far as we are at the moment.
There has been some success, though. As I understand it, the Scottish Government has agreed to include plant-based milk alternatives on their government-funded nursery and early learning scheme.
Yeah, that's right. In 2019, we met with officials in London, and officials from Scotland phoned in on a teleconference rather than be there in person. And as a result of that and then further discussions, the Scottish Government have gone ahead and included plant-based alternatives in their equivalent scheme, which is now renamed to something like the Scottish Milk and Healthy Snack Scheme. I can't remember the exact title of it, but that's the equivalent government-run scheme. But London haven't gone that far yet.
And I believe you also supported the father of a child in his complaint in 2021 that a primary school was only offering cow's milk or water to a vegan child, and the child's parent was banned from bringing soya milk into school. I'm not sure if that's the right summary, but if you could tell us a bit more about that case.
Yeah. So this was a very distressing case. It went on for about 9 months. So Sophia was 4 years old when she was in preschool, and she was allowed to drink her own soya milk in school every day. But when she graduated to nursery and she took her milk out of her bag, she was told to put it back in her bag because it wasn't allowed on school premises. So that in itself is quite distressing for for a 4-year-old girl. And the reason was there was a policy about the provision of milk. If you didn't subscribe to the Cool Milk scheme, which is the supply of cow's milk through the government subsidy scheme, then you could only drink water in school. So we were knocked back 2 or 3 times, and eventually I think the governing body sought external guidance on the human rights and equality law claims that were being made, and they came back and said that yes, Sophia can have soya milk, but you don't have to supply it, we're going to fund it. So it was a big turnaround. I would just add though there that they never admitted any discrimination had taken place.
But nevertheless a big success, and it shows that support can be helpful. Raising animals for slaughter in schools, I've seen in the media this being another area where there can be some conflict between parents with different ideas and ideologies on this. How does this impact on vegan children and their parents in your experience, and what should schools consider when approaching decision making?
Yes, absolutely. The schools should consider their equality duties and their specific duty under the public sector equality duty to foster good relations between vegans and non-vegans, and also to remove as much as possible any kind of discrimination. And they should also be aware that under the parents' right to education, for education according to their moral convictions, they should teach a critical, plural, and unbiased curriculum. So these principles, I think schools still need to get their head around, because as far as I'm concerned, bringing animals onto school property is not thinking about the critical and plural education that should be provided under the curriculum. It's already biased. It's already saying that these animals are resources, and it doesn't take into account the need for a critical and a plural education. If it did, then alongside that there would also be a vegan education, and there isn't.
Yeah. And moving on, Jeanette, to the issue of school meals, is this about providing a plant-based option so that children who follow a vegan diet have an option, or does it go beyond this? What are the sort of issues that you're seeing and vegan parents and children are reporting?
Well, certainly food is a big issue, and I think we've gone beyond the provision of food now. There is a good provision of vegan food. The problem now is the quality of that food. That's becoming quite a big issue. So young children might receive a baked potato and beans 3 times a week, because it's the easy option, you know. So that's one difficulty that's very current. But there are other issues as well that we need to take into account, because pupils are not comfortable in cookery classes where they have to handle products that they don't want to handle. And also art and textiles, we have students looking for alternatives to assessments, and in higher education as well, where students' training programs involve causing suffering or killing, we hear from those students as well for support.
And Jeanette, presumably alongside that is the issue of dissection, because that's still taking place in secondary schools across the country.
Absolutely, but nobody can be forced to participate in dissection. One of the difficulties is if a student wants to progress to a science program where there might be dissection at university level, then they may not be able to pass their assessments if it's required by an assessment body. So that's something to look into on a case-by-case basis. But generally speaking, no student can be compelled to participate in dissection.
Okay, that's helpful to know. Thank you. Carlo, can you tell us about the extent of legal protection in Italy for those who manifest a belief in ethical veganism?
Yeah, our constitution, Article 21 of our constitution, recognizes ethical beliefs, and they should be considered just like religious beliefs. What we see in practice is completely different, because maybe in Italy, the church has very deep roots in our culture, in our society, and also it's very connected with politics. So what we see here is that even if they should be considered the same, they are not. So the Constitution protects both, but when it comes to applying both, it's completely different, because saying that you are vegan because of an ethic perspective, because your ethic perspective says that you should be vegan, they just don't consider you the same as you say that you are vegan because of your religion. If it's because of your religion, they consider that as a duty, so you need to apply that choice. But if you are vegan because of an ethical belief, then it's something, capricious, not really important, not a need.
That's interesting. And also, I found interesting in the book, you describe people being worried or scared by professionals and public officials who might instruct them or persuade them against a vegan diet. And I wondered if this reflected a societal consensus that a vegan diet for children is actually unhealthy. And as a lawyer in these cases, what evidence can you put before the court to present the scientific evidence on this?
Yeah, actually, we have a lot of scientific evidences and also a lot of literature about that. But it's complicated because doctors, at least in Italy, at least today, nowadays, they still think that being vegan is harmful. So they are spreading such idea also thanks to the media, as I said. And when it comes to an actual trial, well, I use the vegan doctors just to prove that being vegan is not harmful, and it's the opposite. And in my case, when I needed to, they were just able to make the court agree. But yeah, in general, I see that the court just prefers to avoid involving such issues, and when they can, they try to decide based on different issues, such as the law, because you cannot discriminate because they just don't want to recognize that being vegan is good, because they just don't want such decisions to be spread. It's my opinion, of course.
And you cite in the book, again, in your chapter, an example of parental choice being taken away from parents where a child had become malnourished. And people may think, well, that's actually a very reasonable approach to safeguard the well-being of the child. So what's your view on that?
Well, it's very complicated once again, because you have no evidence that being vegan is harmful. So you cannot just apply a prejudice to enforce the law that allow the court to remove kids from their parents. In one case that happened to a client of me, and well, in front of the court, I just needed to say, okay, there's no evidence here that those kids have any issue of any kind. So you decided just based on prejudice. And basically the court had to agree, because after that hearing, the day after, kids were returned to their parents. So the court basically had to agree with me. And yeah, that's pretty obvious in my eyes, because it's just a prejudice. Because when it comes to different diets, of course, they need scientific evidence to say that the parent made something wrong and that the kid really has some issues because of those choices. But when it comes to veganism, they just don't need evidence anymore.
I think you also make the point in the book that actually, rather than focusing on correcting the parents' dietary approach within the confines of their ethical beliefs, there's too much of a focus on the diet itself rather than on the nutritional aspects and the problems that can come with any diet, whether it's omnivorous or not, in terms of ensuring that children have the correct balance of nutrients.
And Carlo, if you mentioned a court case that you basically challenged the court for its discrimination. Are you referencing your 2015 court case when you represented a single mother whose 2-year-old was expelled from nursery school when she requested a vegan option? Is that the case that you're referencing?
Yes, you're right.
Tell us a little bit more about that case, please.
Yeah, it was a very important case, I'd say a milestone here in Italy, because it was the first time for parents, and in particular for a single parent, which might be even more complicated, to go in front of a court asking permission for a vegan diet at school. In that case, it was a kindergarten. Because usually, at least here in Italy, they just try to find a compromise of any kind to avoid filing a lawsuit. In that case, they weren't able to find a solution. And so, yeah, the school was very hard on that, because they were really worried about the kid being vegan, because he was just 2 years old. So the school was very hard. And
they wanted medical records, right?
Yeah, actually, they didn't have any actual scientific proof or evidence that their opinion was better than my client's opinion. They were just saying that the school policy didn't allow a kid to be entirely vegan. They said that they were complying with the law because they were offering a vegetarian option. And they were also trying to say that it was because of not their fault, but because of some internal issues in making a vegan menu, because they said, okay, you see, we don't have enough nutritional in vegan diets, so we need to make at least a vegetarian option. Otherwise, the kid is gonna miss some nutrients. And that was their point, but they were very confused about that because they were just, as I said, probably afraid. So yeah, the court in that case ruled in favor of my client because once again, the school didn't have any good reason or any research or scientific evidence to promote their decision and to affirm their decision. So
yeah, and hopefully we might actually be hearing from this vegan mom who would describe her experiences herself at a subsequent webinar that the Animal Rights Committee will be organizing for mid-October. So if people in today's audience are interested, please check out our Facebook page for the date and time and registration information. Our Facebook page is NLGNYC Animal.Rights. Turning it over to you, Paula.
Oh, thank you. And I shall be tuning in for your webinar. I'm really fascinated now. And we will put details of that on our podcast page as well for anyone who wants to, pick up those details there. Just a final question for you, Carlo. And it just refers to the Italian bill that was proposed in 2016, in fact, to take away parental authority for parents to raise children to follow a vegan diet. I mean, I was really surprised to read about this in the chapter. What's happened about that? What are your thoughts?
well, the bill was not even discussed in the parliament, so it never became a law. But I think that somehow it reached its goal because it scared a lot of vegan parents. And many people just asked me information because they were thinking that it was already a law and that being vegan parents would have become a big issue for them. So somehow I think they did it just by promoting and advertising such bill. It is my opinion that such bill included once again many interests because, as I said, the animal industry is very strong here in Italy. They have a lot of power and they are very influent. So the parliament is very conditioned by them. And I think that it was definitely a try to fight against veganism and scare vegan people.
I have to say that to both of you, I really enjoyed the book, and I found it really helpful to have that comparative perspective and to learn more about the different attitudes and the different problems that people are experiencing in different jurisdictions. So, well done to both of you for that book. It was tremendously helpful. And we'll also, for our listeners, put details on our podcast page so that if anyone wants to find it and get a copy, they can do that. But that's all the questions I have. Tamara, I don't know if you have anything else.
Well, I'd like to get your perspective now, Ralf. So Germany is a signatory to the European Convention of Human Rights. So presumably Article 9 applies, and the state must have important reasons to interfere with the exercise of veganism. So how does this translate into a duty on the state or public bodies to provide vegan food?
Yeah, this is, of course, a very complex question, and we first should see how Article 9 and the European Rights Convention plays out in Germany. So like I think in every country, first you need an exhaustion of all the courts. So if you claim to be violated in your human rights, you first need to have seen all the national courts before you can go to the European Court of Human Rights. And there was one very famous and very important decision. The case was called Hermann against Germany, where Article 9 and animal rights and Article 20A of the German Constitution, so this the duty of the German government to protect the environment for future generations and animals, where all this was considered by the European Court of Human Rights. So this is a very important court decision. And in this decision, this is, I think, a very important read for all animal rights activists and lawyers, because they explain their view on the convention and animal rights, and they state that the European Human Rights Convention is based on a qualified speciesism. So what does that mean, qualified speciesism? So that means our Human Rights Convention is basically anthropocentric. Yeah, animals do not have own rights, even if the state needs to protect them. That doesn't mean that animals have own rights or nature has own rights. But humans have the right to protect animals, because in this case, the plaintiff claimed that hunting is forbidden on his private land, and he won the case. And they said that we have, based on Article 9, as human beings, the right to protect animals. And if you have the right to protect animals in your land, you also have the right to protect animals in your body. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
So that's quite, I think that's quite clear that Article 9 protects ethical veganism. We have many decisions from the European Court of Human Rights, but does that mean that the German government has to provide vegan food?
That's right.
And that's a different question, and there we need to see what does it mean? What does a human right mean? What does constitutional rights mean? Do they protect us from intervention of the state, or do they give us a personal claim for the state to act? So
well, I was just going to ask you about that very question in the educational context. So in nurseries and schools, vegan parents are often having to self-supply as there's a lack of vegan options. And you brought a case that went up to the German Constitutional Court claiming the right to a vegan option to be available at school to cater for the needs of vegan children. So can you tell us about that and that court's ruling?
Yes, of course, there are many issues for vegan children and vegan parents, and I would like to show them all, and that will make it more clear. Also the role of constitutional rights and Article 9. And I need to say that this was my case, and I went to the administrative court, the higher administrative court, and then gave it to a specialist for constitutional complaints, because you always, when we have such important cases, we need to have the best specialists to go forward. But of course, I can tell the whole story. So if you have your vegan children in the kindergarten, you can have different problems. First problem, you don't get vegan food, and you're not even allowed to bring in your vegan food. So that's the hardest case. And I very often have cases like that. So do you have the right to self-supply in the kindergarten? So this is also a legal issue. And first question, do you have the right to self-supply? Second question, these are the apportionment cases. So the school or kindergarten provides food and the parents need to pay a monthly fee for the food. And if you are vegan and the food is not vegan, do you have to pay for the food? Yeah. And the third case is, can you ask the kindergarten or the school to provide vegan food? So these are three issues. And so let's see them under the light of constitutional rights. And well, at least the constitutional rights protect us from arbitrary state intervention. So in the cases of apportionment, at least in Germany, we always, if the state claims something from us as citizens, he needs a backing in a law. And our laws in Germany always have, we call that vague legal terms, because this vague legal terms give judges the opportunity to decide the individual case better. So, for example, in the case of apportionment, you very often have legal terms that if there is an important issue for the parents, they can be exempted from the apportionment. So the question is ethical veganism an important reason? Yeah, and this has been very often said by administrative courts in Germany. They say, of course, ethical veganism must be seen under the constitutional right in Germany of Article 4 that protects conscience, religious and non-religious belief. And they see this as really big right that encompasses the whole field of protection. And of course, ethical veganism is protected by this constitutional right. And then when they interpret a vague legal term such as important reason, this is seen as an important reason. So this works. So you get freed from the apportionment if you're vegan, if there's no vegan food available, and you have the right to self-supply if they don't provide vegan food. Even in prisons, yeah, which is a even more restricted situation. So, do you have the right against the claim against the state to provide vegan food? So you get from this status of protection into the status of claim. Is this possible with constitutional rights? And well, in general, not. Yeah, it was never different in Germany. But if other groups that are comparable with your case get this protection, for example, if there is kosher food provided or halal food provided, then the similarity gives another protection with equal rights, with Article 3 of our Constitution. So in this case, you might have a claim, but only if other groups
are receiving that kind of dietary assistance. Okay.
Now, so this is more or less what the Constitutional Court, they did not write much, yeah, but this is what you can interpret in their decision.
Now, what happens though in circumstances where parents have separated or divorced, and one of them is a vegan and one of them is not? How do the courts approach with these kinds of one parent is not vegan? How do the courts approach withdrawal of custody issues in Germany?
Okay, so now we're moving from constitutional and administrative law to family law. Yeah.
Mhm.
So this is in Germany, this is considered as civil law, and I'm doing a lot of family law in my office. So I have several cases that had an issue with that, and I also wrote in my book about the topics. So first, one if parents get separated, the problem is they never think about the children. Yeah, so this is very sad, and it's even more sad when parents, when they love each other, accept the ethical nutrition of the other parents, and when they separate, they take this as reason to to take the custody away. So this is a very emotional confrontation, and kind of mean confrontation, if you ask me, as human being, not as lawyer. But first question is, when you separate, who has the right to decide on which diet the child is? I don't know how you play out this in the US, but well, I write this in my book, and as far as I see the decisions in Germany, this parent where the children live has the right to determine the food. So if, say, the children live regularly with the mom and the father has the right to visit, then she can say what the children eats when the children visit him. Okay,
Mhm.
so this is the right to decide for the food option. So this is one family law issue. Another family law issue is when can you take away the custody of a parent? And this is only possible if the well-being of the child is endangered. So, and there are many attempts to say that veganism endangers the health of the children, but we have like a kind of German food authority, and they have recommendations for a vegan diet. And I always tell the vegan parents that they strictly have to follow these recommendations and prove that they did that, and they can show the blood profile of the children. And if they supplement with vitamin B, there's no health issue. There's no endangerment of the well-being. So in general, no risk at all. One exception, I had a very interesting case. Well, there are cases where mothers cannot breastfeed the babies.
Mhm.
Yeah? And still, we do not have vegan supplements that are seen from the majority of medical doctors as sufficient to provide food for the babies. So in this case, there could be an endangerment, and I had such a case, and then I had a very practical idea, because I was thinking about the medieval situation when yes, when not the noble mother breastfed the child,
But a servant.
but a servant, yes. And I thought, well, there should be mother's milk on the market, and yes, we have in Germany. There is excess of mother milk, and you can have it everywhere. So, and the mothers are ready to share their milk, and
Oh wow,
so that's a very practical approach to solve this problem.
that's incredible. I didn't know that human milk was available and commercialized in Germany. I had no idea.
Well,
Thank you.
it's not commercialized, so it's shared.
It's shared.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
not. No,
It's not on the shelf. It's not on the supermarket shelf.
Yes, no. I wouldn't like to have it commercialized personally. Yeah, but mothers share their milk with other mothers, and yeah.
Okay. Well, moving now from family law to labor law,
Yes.
what protections exist for employees asked to carry out tasks that violate their ethical beliefs?
Okay. Well, this question does not only concern labor law, but any discrimination that you can suffer of as vegan. So you can suffer from discrimination because you don't get a place in the kindergarten, for example. I had a case like that. I will describe that later. Or you can suffer discrimination in hotel situations, with your landlord who says, I do not accept vegans, or of course at the labor situation. So we have to see that our labor law in Germany is quite supportive for workers, I would say, in general. Many employers complain that we have a very strong labor law in Germany. So there is, whenever the employer asks something that could be harassing, could be a harassment, irrespective of a discriminational background, you can say, well, this is only meant to harass me in my situation. And then we have a shift of the burden of proof, and the employer needs to prove that he needs this for his company, that there's company need to ask this from you. So this is in itself a good situation for employees in Germany. But the other problem, and I'm really sad to have this to tell from Germany, is that, and this is a problem which has to do with a wrong translation from Article 9 and the Anti-Discrimination, the European Anti-Discrimination Act, because in the Article 9 European Rights Convention and the Anti-Discrimination Act, they have the word belief and ethical belief and or non-religious belief, however you would like to name it. And this is unfortunately translated in Germany as Weltanschauung. Yes, and Weltanschauung itself is a special notion in our constitution. And from a certain historic background, Weltanschauung is seen very narrow, much more narrow than the non-religious belief that we have in the European Rights Convention, or those people who did the anti-discrimination, the European anti-discrimination regulation. So we have the situation that in the interpretation of most of the lawyers in Germany, ethical veganism does not fall under Weltanschauung and therefore is not protected under the German Anti-Discrimination Act, which in my view is just wrong. There's a mistranslation, and then we have the situation that a vegan in Great Britain is protected under the Anti-Discrimination Act, which was a European act, and in Greece he is protected, but in Germany not. So that doesn't really make sense. And I'm very optimistic that I will not, well, there are one or two guys, one is me, that say this is, that of course ethical veganism is protected by the German Anti-Discrimination Act. And I think I'm optimistic that in future a European court will say the same, will share my ideas and come to the same result. But I had my first case where I had the discrimination of, as I told, of vegan parents that applied for a kindergarten, and the kindergarten said, yeah, okay, you can come. And then they said, what? But we're vegan. No, vegan food we don't provide. And then I wrote them a long letter with all their constitutional rights and Article 9 European Rights Convention. And then they said, oh, no, the place, we don't have the place anymore. So, well, first they said, we have the place. And then when veganism came in, then they said there's no place available anymore. So this is a clear indication that this has to do with veganism. So, and in this case, fortunately, their parents had a Buddhist background.
Mm-hmm.
And I could sue them for religious discrimination, and then they had they just paid the money that I asked, and there was no court decision. The case went to
They
court,
settled.
and they settled it. Yes.
Yeah.
And yes, why should it's nonsense and strange. Why should someone who believes in God, and has empathy for animals has more protection than an agnostic or
That's right.
that
That's
loves
right.
animals? So this is even from the result total nonsense, and we need to be optimistic that in future we will have wonderful decisions of wiser judges.
Wiser judges. Thank you.
Pragmatic judges. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much for answering, Ralf. And it was a pleasure to speak with you today on veganism and the law.
Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you to all our speakers today, to Jeanette, to Carlo, to Ralf, and to Tamara for co-hosting with me today, making my life a lot easier. We'll be back again next month. Thank you all for listening in, and please subscribe to our podcast so that you don't miss an episode.
For more information about the work of the UK Centre for Animal Law, please go to www.alaw.org.uk.
For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's iroarpod.com.